Well, honestly, I think that true climate denial is really dying around the world, in part because over the last few years we've seen so much extreme weather that it's just become really undeniable. And the polls show this too. The number of people, even in the U.S., which is historically the hotbed of climate denial, the number of people who don't believe climate change is happening is about 20%, 25%, which it's too high for me. I'd rather it was zero, but 25% of Americans think that aliens live on planet Earth, and we don't have those people running NASA, so we shouldn't have the climate deniers running our climate policy either. And a coalition of 75% of the public or 80% of the public who believes, that's enough in a democracy to get anything done. The problem is, I think that those 75 or 80%, at least those are the numbers in the US, in Europe, the numbers are actually higher. They don't really believe it enough. Like, they think that climate change is happening. They've seen it now, especially in the fires and the heat waves and the hurricanes. They see it's here, but they don't understand just how severe the outcomes will be and just how urgent how much urgent action is needed to avoid what I think most people would process as worst case futures, even if they're more sort of middle of the road, middle of the bell curve possibilities. And when I come into contact with someone who has some concerns, but is not fully, is not where I am about just how dramatic a threat and a challenge this is, I just talk them through the weather events of the last few years. My favorite example is these storms that have hit the city of Houston in Texas. 500-year storms have hit in the last 5 years. Now, a conscious consumer of the news understands that a 500-year storm is now a sort of meaningless term. But I think it's useful to return to it because it tells us just how out of whack the climate system already is. 500 years ago, Hernando Cortez had just landed in Mexico. No Europeans had made their way to North America at all. So we're talking about a storm that meteorologically you'd expect to hit once during that entire history. The arrival of Europeans to North America, the establishment of colonies, the fighting of a genocide against the native people, the fighting of a revolution, the building of a slave empire, the Civil War, industrialization, World War I, World War II, the American Empire, the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, the end of history, the financial crisis. We're talking about a storm that we should expect to hit once during that entire history. And Houston, one city, has been hit by 5 of them in the last 5 years.